Welcome to Balanced But Barely, a podcast for anyone who looks like they have it all together, but internally has about 47 tabs open in their mind. I'm Carla Jean, and each episode we talk real-life stress, anxiety, and self-regulation in a way that actually makes sense. You'll walk away with practical tools to feel calmer, think clear, and create more balance without needing to hide underneath your weighted blanket by 2 p.m. The affiliate for today's episode is Find the Good, a clothing brand determined to spread love and awareness one awesome sweatshirt at a time. Please go check them out at findthegood.com and use promo code CarlaJean143, that's CarlaJean143 at the checkout for an exclusive 10% discount because you deserve it. Welcome back to Balance But Barely. This is the podcast for people who are trying to protect their peace while also apologizing to someone for taking longer than 6 minutes to text them back. I'm Carla Jean, your host, and today we are talking about boundaries, safe spaces, emotional safety, and why so many of us feel guilty just for protecting ourselves. But before we get into that, I need to share a little balanced but barely moment from this week because wowza, with a capital W, capital O, capital W, capital Z, capital A, wowza. This week, my energy was everywhere, you guys. You know those weeks where your brain has like 47 tabs open, there's 3 songs playing at once, and somehow I found myself both exhausted and restless at the same time, like you're laying in bed, you're so tired, but you can't stop moving, you can't stop thinking. Yeah, that was me all week. I sat down to work probably like 15 different times this week, and somehow I ended up reorganizing a drawer, staring into my refrigerator like it's held some sort of secrets to the universe. You know, those 5 minutes on Instagram turned into, my full-time career that day. And emotionally preparing myself to answer text messages that were not emotionally charged. And honestly, old me would have just spiraled. I would have immediately gone into what's wrong with me? Why can't I focus? I'm falling behind. I'm failing. But instead, I just noticed it. That's a huge difference for me. I noticed that my nervous system was overloaded, and instead of turning it into attack on my identity and saying horrible, mean things to myself, I chose mindfulness. So instead of forcing my productivity through panic, I chose to pause and be mindful. And not in like a perfect meditation retreat kind of way. That's gross. But in a real life kind of way. I took walks outside without my phone. I sat outside for 10 minutes or more without touching my laptop, just sitting there listening to the birds. I focused on one task at a time instead of mentally moving to the next. And I breathed before I reacted. And the biggest thing that I did this week is I gave myself permission to be human. Slowly, my nervous system settled enough for me to move forward. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't magical, but it was intentional. And honestly, that's what boundaries are too. Boundaries are mindfulness in relationship form. Today's episode is heavily inspired by the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And if you've never read it, I'm going to break it down. So basically, the book shares 4 simple, powerful agreements that you can practice in everyday life to minimize or totally get rid of the suffering that you are experiencing in life and to enhance your happiness and joy. So the 4 agreements are as follows. 1, be impeccable with your word. 2, don't take anything personally. 3, don't make assumptions. And 4, always do your best. So this is one of my favorite books, and I used this book a lot when I would teach yoga. I read from this book almost every single class. I would remind all of my students in every class to do these 4 agreements. I would focus on one and I would really sort of give examples and encourage a conversation around them because although they sound simple, they will completely change how you communicate, how you regulate your nervous system, and how you protect your own peace. because these agreements teach us how to stop emotionally attacking ourselves and others. They teach us how to create healthier relationships. They teach us to communicate more clearly, reduce unnecessary suffering, and respond instead of reacting. That is one of my biggest lessons I drove home with my son when he was younger and still to this day. We do not react, we respond. We take a beat, we take a breath, and we let ourselves move through whatever the feelings are at that moment. And then our response will be coming from a place of love and a place of caring versus a place of fear or a place of anger. Basically, in a nutshell, it's like emotional maturity with a spiritual little side eye, right? So today we're talking what boundaries actually are, why emotional safety space matters, and how we abandon ourselves to avoid disappointing others. And most importantly, I hope that you will take away from this episode is how to stop feeling guilty for protecting your peace. All right, let's get into it. I think a lot of people confuse comfort with safety. Just because something is familiar doesn't mean that it's emotionally safe. And I know a lot of us grew up in environments where we learned how to keep the peace, how not to upset anybody, how to not be too much or don't need too much, to always stay agreeable, to stay small, and to stay easy to love. So now as adults, we struggle to even identify what safety feels like. A safe space is not a place where conflict never happens. It is a place where honesty is allowed, emotions are respected, boundaries are honored, and nervous systems are not constantly in defense mode. Safe people do not make you earn your worth through exhaustion. And honestly, one of the biggest signs you're emotionally unsafe somewhere is this feeling that you have to perform constantly. Maybe you rehearse what you're going to say before you say it. Maybe you are constantly monitoring everyone's mood. Do you over-explain? Do you over-apologize? Or even shrink yourself to avoid tension? You guys, that's not peace. That's called survival. And survival is exhausting. One of the most powerful agreements for this section is don't take anything personally. Because when we constantly personalize other people's moods, reactions, or energy shifts, we begin abandoning ourselves trying to emotionally manage everyone else. That's called hypervigilance, and it's draining. See, most people's reactions are rooted in their own experiences, their own fears, stress, wounds, and not by your worth. And when we stop carrying responsibility for everyone's emotional state, our nervous system finally gets to breathe. I want you to do this with me. Take a deep, slow breath in, and then ask yourself, where in my life do I feel emotionally safe to fully relax and be myself? I'll repeat that. Where in my life do I feel emotionally safe to fully relax and be myself? And take another deep breath in and ask yourself, where do I feel like I have to perform to stay loved? I'll repeat it for you. Where do I feel like I have to perform to stay loved? And just notice the answer without any judgment. It might give you some insight. When my son was entering junior high, I knew it was going to be a difficult transition from being a kiddo to a teenager. We all know that middle schoolers can be vicious. And with social media just taking off around that time, I knew it could be tricky to positively navigate the landscape full of bullies, unsupervised internet access, and, the normal peer pressure. We all know that this period of time for a youngster can negatively affect their identity and their sense of worth. And I really just did not want this for my kid. So On the first day of school, I knew I needed to reiterate the facts of what he was about to walk into without freaking him out at the same time. Our morning started like any other morning with the scurry of first day jitters, excitement, reluctantly taking that first day picture on the porch. We arrived at school, long line of cars. We're sitting there, we're chatting, we're getting closer and closer to drop off point, and I'm getting a little nervous. I'm looking around, I'm taking in this new social environment that he is going to enter into. And I was so nervous for him, but I could also feel his excitement. So before he jumped out of the car, I stopped him. And this is what I said. I looked him straight in the eye and I said, I need you to remember these 3 things every day. 1, you are awesome. 2, not everyone is going to agree with that. And 3, if someone is mean to you, please know that that has more to do with their going through and how they feel about themselves than you. At 13 years old, as they do, he shrugged off my very inspirational speech, if I do say so myself, hopped out of the car, waved goodbye, and faded into the crowd. I have no idea if he ever used that advice. I also don't even know if he remembers that I said that. But I remember, and I use that advice for myself almost every day. This advice has never applied more than when I began learning not just how to set boundaries, but why boundaries were so important for my health and my well-being. Setting boundaries and holding people accountable when those boundaries are crossed is not for the weak, guys. It is not. I understand now why when people interact with me, sometimes I get people saying, "You're so brave." And I never understood that until I started really holding people accountable for boundaries that were crossed. Because when you hold people accountable, it's unpredictable what the outcome is going to be. So a bit of bravery is definitely required. It feels uncomfortable to set boundaries at first. It also can feel very isolating and painful. But in my experience, the long-term consequences of not setting boundaries are 100 times more uncomfortable, more isolating, and more painful. The people who want to continue to hurt you and manipulate you because it benefits them and or relieves the suffering that they're experiencing will be the ones that kick and scream the loudest when a boundary is established. But those who want to see you thrive and truly love you unconditionally will welcome your boundaries and celebrate the growth that they're seeing right before their eyes. I believe that boundaries are an expression of love towards myself and towards others, although some people don't see it that way. But whenever I set a boundary with a person, it is a desire to protect and or develop a loving relationship with that person. I believe this is what is meant when people say you have to love yourself first before others can love you. Because boundaries for me are an act of self-love. And through that love, you set boundaries for others to know how to love you properly. Boundaries also teach us empathy for others. When I was inspiring my son with my TED Talk in front of the junior high about knowing that if people are mean, to realize that that is an expression of their own fear or their own suffering, my hope was to teach him empathy for others. And I think it worked. I don't know. He's a pretty empathetic person now. So I'm hoping that that had some influence. Understanding that when someone crosses a boundary, it is not about you at all. It's about their need for control, their need to manipulate you, and almost always their need to protect themselves from fear and the suffering that they are experiencing in their own lives. I have let several people go from my life because they could not or would not respect or honor the boundaries I have set for myself so that I could live the life that I want and that I deserve. I didn't let them go because I didn't love them or I didn't care for them. I let them go because I finally learned how to love and care for myself more. My boundaries are non-negotiable. They are essential for my survival. And if we have to part ways because my boundaries do not feel manageable for you or fair, I understand and I wish you well. But if at any point you choose to change your mind and you can respect my boundaries, I would love to have you back in my life. Okay, let's talk about why boundaries make so many of us physically uncomfortable. Because if you're someone who people pleases, overfunctions, avoids conflict, feels responsible for everyone, or feels abandonment, boundaries can feel terrifying. Not because they're wrong, but because your nervous system has learned keeping everyone happy keeps me safe. So when you finally try to say, I can't do that right now, or that hurt me, or I need space, or I just don't have the capacity today, your body literally reacts like you just committed a felony. Meanwhile, all you did was tell a friend that you can't dog sit for them. One of the agreements in the 4 agreements that really applies here is be impeccable with your word. And that includes the promises that you make to yourself. Because every time you say yes when you mean no, your nervous system feels or hears self-betrayal. Every single time. Being impeccable with your word means speaking honestly, communicating clearly, not using your words against yourself, and not agreeing to things that destroy your peace just to avoid discomfort. Resentment grows wherever honesty is absent. Healthy boundaries sound like this. I care about you, but I don't have the capacity right now. Or very simply, I need rest. How about that doesn't work for me? And honestly, what you're going to see happen is the people who benefit most from your lack of boundaries are usually the ones the most uncomfortable when you finally create them. Yeah, that one tends to hit a little hard, especially when you start to notice who those people are. It can be very, very hurtful. So let's do this together. Go ahead and place one hand on your chest and take a nice, deep, slow breath in. And ask yourself, where am I saying yes out of guilt instead of genuine desire? Take another slow, deep breath in and ask yourself, and what would change if I trusted that my needs mattered too? There's no fixing. There's no judging. We are just taking time to notice. There was a time in my life when I was sort of forced, just because of circumstances, to become a full-time caregiver for someone that I loved very much. It came from a very traumatic accident that I was also present for, followed by 6 months in the hospital. So not fun at all. But by the time I became his caregiver, I had already been living in a constant state of fight or flight for 6 months and been giving everything that I had to make sure he had what he needed, not only to survive, but also to be happy. After only a few months of caregiving, I began experiencing migraines, insomnia, and head-to-toe breakouts of hives. I'd never had hives before, actually. So that was a bit scary. And I wasn't sick. I didn't have any allergies. I couldn't figure out what was happening. It wasn't until I started seeing a therapist that I realized that my body was trying to get me to listen, because I had been ignoring what my mind had been telling me for almost half a year. First, I hadn't processed the fear and feelings I had experienced on the day of the accident. Second, I prioritized his needs over mine no matter what. And third, I never let myself be quiet long enough to hear my own cries of pain. My body was burnt out. It couldn't sustain the pace and the lack of care that I was putting it through, and it was letting me know loud and clear. That was the beginning of my yoga as medicine journey. I started learning yoga and guarded that time as if my life depended on it. It was known in my household that nothing was to be scheduled during my yoga class time, but it was up to me to hold that boundary. If someone invited me to something or to join them to do something during that time, it was up to me to respond in alignment with my boundary. If an appointment was scheduled during that time, it was my responsibility to remind them that I was not available at that time. In doing so, I communicated to them that I valued myself and my health. The unselfish and the healed people will welcome these boundaries and even congratulate you on them. While others, they're going to take it personally, and they may even pout about it, even though this boundary, your boundaries, have nothing to do with them. Those are the people it's okay to let go of, because you are only beneficial to them if you stay sick, if you stay unhealed, and if you stay broken. And for most people, your boundary requires them to take a hard, long look at themselves in the mirror. And what they see is scary. So here's the thing that nobody tells you. Boundaries are not just external, they're internal too. Because some of us have mastered protecting everyone else while speaking to ourselves like absolute garbage. We know that voice, right? Some of us even name that voice. My voice has a name. So I know your voice, that internal voice probably has a name too. Internal boundaries look like this. It looks like not spiraling after every mistake that you make. It looks like not catastrophizing after every hard moment. It looks like not allowing shame to narrate your life. And it looks like not emotionally bullying yourself into productivity. And honestly, that's where mindfulness becomes the most powerful. Mindfulness teaches you to pause before reacting, to notice instead of immediately judging, and to respond instead of spiraling. Another agreement from the 4 agreements is don't make assumptions. And wow, our anxious brains absolutely hate that one because assumptions are anxiety's favorite hobby. We assume they're mad at me. I messed everything up. I'm failing. Nobody cares, or I'm too much. Meanwhile, most of the time, none of that has actually been confirmed. Mindfulness helps us return to what is true instead of what is feared. The final agreement says, always do your best. Not perfection, not burnout, not proving your worth through exhaustion, just your best. And your best will look different depending on your energy, your mental health, the season in which you are in life, and your nervous system capacity. So some days your best is thriving, and some days your best is answering one email and drinking water. Both count. And you guys, for me, some days it's taking a shower. Like some days my best is taking a shower and brushing my teeth. That's it. I scored that day. High five, Carla Jean. We did it. Go ahead and do this with me. Close your eyes for a moment if it feels safe. If you are driving, listening to this podcast, please do not close your eyes. For all others, feel free to close your eyes. I want you to take one deep breath in and one very slow breath out. Now ask yourself, what would protecting my peace actually look like in this season of my life? I'll say it again. What would protecting my peace actually look like in this season of my life? Not the ideal version, not the Instagram version, the honest version. And then let yourself hear your answer. Nervous system regulation is absolutely imperative to your health and the longevity of your well-being. Although our bodies are amazing, our nervous system cannot discern from different types of stress. So the stress of being physically attacked and the stress of betrayal or guilt or shame or just a crammed schedule engages the same response from the body. And according to the CDC, the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention, long-term chronic stress can lead to worsening health problems, including heart disease, high blood pressure, anxiety, depression, weakened immune system, sleep disorders, and digestive issues. One particularly powerful stat from the CDC shares that healthcare expenditures are nearly 50% greater for workers who report high levels of stress. So not only is it causing physical harm and mental harm, this stress, but it's also going to cause financial harm with this increase for need for medical care. Research also shows that chronic stress increases the risk of cardiovascular disease and can negatively impact both mental and physical health over time. So when we allow hurtful, negative, and or destructive behaviors to continue, our bodies stay in an activated state. It's the state where our bodies never fully rest, never fully digest or relax. I was in this state for so many years that I actually never felt stressed. It was so normal for me to be in that state that it wasn't until my body started to express the symptoms like migraines, insomnia, and hives before I realized something was wrong. I believe that setting boundaries saved my life. I believe that holding myself and others accountable to those boundaries are an expression of love and protection. And I know that boundaries are necessary to live a fully healed and balanced life. So before we close today, I want you to remember this. Boundaries are not walls. They are instructions. They teach people how to love you without losing yourself in the process. And creating a safe space for yourself starts with believing you deserve one. You deserve relationships where your nervous system can soften, where your no is respected, where your needs are not treated like little inconveniences, and where your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice. I'm going to say that again for the people in the back and also to remind myself, because this is the hardest one for someone whose love language is acts of service. Your worth is not measured by how much you sacrifice. Please hear me when I say this. Protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. All right, that's what I have for you today. If this episode resonated with you, go ahead and subscribe to Balance But Barely so you don't miss out on what's next. And if you know someone who desperately needs permission to stop overextending themselves, send them this episode, because emotional support podcasts are cheaper than burnout recovery. You can connect with me on Instagram at _Carla Jean 143. For more support and resources, head over to www.carlajean143.com. And for mindfulness, nervous system support, follow me on YouTube at Carla Jean 143. And until next time, take a deep breath, unclench your jaw and maybe your booty cheeks, drink some water, and remember, protecting your peace is not selfish. This is Balanced But Barely, and we're figuring it out together.